Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the CPA Advisory Show. My name is Chris Servishon, along here with my co-host, Jeremy Wells, and today we are going to be talking about presenting financial information to your clients using pretty pictures. Jeremy, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you, Chris?
Best day ever, just back from a gauge, recovering from that still, as I know you are, but all is well.
So on the last regular episode we got to talking about how we're trying to be helpful for our clients. And part of that is helping them keep up with the finances of their business. And as accountants, we're trained to read these documents called financial statements. And they have a bunch of financial information in them, and they're really useful if you know how to read them. The problem is a lot of clients either they don't know how to read them, or they don't want to read them, or they ignore them when we send them to them. And I mentioned on that episode that, a lot of times I feel like I'm putting together these reports of these financial statements and I'm sending them to my clients and I'm not getting any kind of response back. I don't know if they're reading them. I don't know if they're useful for them or anything. You had mentioned that you have maybe some different tactics or strategies on that. So what I want to do is learn from you about how to get clients to actually understand and care about the financial data and financial reports for their business. So Chris, help me out here, man.
Okay. So your practice starts from like a tax first mindset, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. So how many of your clients actually read their tax returns?
Oh, not enough. Not enough. I'm lucky if they sign them, after a day or two after I send them, and I don't have to remind them. There are two kinds. There are the ones, which are most of them, where they just sign it within 5 minutes, and I know they haven't looked at any of it. And then the others that write me back with a list of questions, and 90% of them they're asking questions about things that don't even matter. They're like things that automatically calculate or things that I don't control about the return. So yeah.
Right. We have the exact same experience. And I think, the reason is, and the feedback that I've gotten is because those documents are intimidating. And to a lot of people, they're just numbers on a page and they don't really mean anything. Financial statements are the same exact way. So when we're talking about CAS, one of the things that we're delivering are financial statements and financial information. And the real question is, how do we deliver that information in a way that is friendly and approachable and easily digestible for a client? And one of the ways that we do that is, as I alluded to, is pretty pictures. And what does that mean? It basically just means taking the financial information that you are, financial and non-financial information, I should mention, taking that information that you are providing to a client to tell their story and doing it in a way that is represented in some sort of a chart or a graph. So it becomes a little bit more approachable. It's not just numbers on a page at that point.
So let's say I've got a client bookkeeping that I do in QBO, right? And I tell QBO I want a P&L, I want a monthly P&L. It spits me out a P&L, and I've got all the income, all the expense lines, I've got the numbers. How do I make a chart out of that? QBO isn't going to make a nice little chart out of that for me. Where would I go? What would I do with that data? That isn't going to take me all day of exporting a lot of data, importing it into something else, and making some weird graphs and stuff that maybe I don't even know how to do that.
Right. And that's the key, is how are we going to scale a CAS practice? And scaling, what that means to me is that we are providing more services to more clients without necessarily providing a whole lot more effort. And so we need systems in place that are going to be repeatable, that are going to be able to be repeated by staff level. So people who haven't necessarily been in the CAS world for a long time, and that can be automated at least to some standard, right? There's a couple of ways to do this. Before we kind of get into that, you need to kind of level set on what are we producing. And there, in my mind, there's two things that we can produce. One would be a dashboard, and then one would be a report. What's the difference? The dashboard is one page, simple. One page, 6 to 7 metrics, that's it. Something that your client is going to look at, digest it, not click off the page, and then be done with it. A report is something that is more robust. It can include a dashboard, but it's going to be more than one page. There's going to be certainly more than 6 or 7 different charts and graphs that we're going to look at. That is what we produce for our clients. We produce a report that's 5 or 6 different tabs depending on the client. And we kind of segregated out income statement, balance sheet, cash flow. And then we've got some other tools that are built in there that they can toggle and play around, do some what if analysis and things like that. So it depends on what we're going to produce, because we want to be using the right tool for the job. Certainly you can go into QBO, export whatever you're looking at into Excel or Google Sheets, and then just layer on a chart or a graph on that and send it to the client and be done with it. That's one way. Another way, if you're using QBO Advanced, you can use a tool like Fathom, which comes with a subscription. But there are a ton of different tools out there. You've got Power BI, you've got Tableau, you've got Google Data Studio, you've got Fathom, Giraffe, Reach. You know, the list goes on and on and on. It really just kind of depends on what do you have expertise in using, what is the cost going to be, and that gets into how you're going to be pricing the service and pricing your clients, and what can your team use and scale up to quickly, meaning it's not going to take them 6 months or a year to try to figure out, like, hey, how do we write DAX and Power BI, that sort of thing. Something that's intuitive that they can use and jump into in a fairly short period of time in order to drive value to the clients.
Yeah, I've looked at a few of these, and I think it's kind of on a range from a fairly plug and play option, like you said, something that almost looks like it was built to be a sort of next step after you're done in QBO, right? So you do the monthly close in QBO, and then you go over to something like Fathom or Reach or something like this, where it's got sort of that direct connection, and now you can start pulling in information. And QBO, to be fair, QBO itself over the last maybe year or two has started doing a little bit more in terms of the reporting, but it's all just stuff that you have to log in and look at. There's nothing
Right.
that I've found yet that you can really export. It's not like I can, I can open up QBO and I can look at some graphs and charts and that kind of thing, but none of that is exportable material. I can't add any of those components to, say, a monthly report template that then I could go send to my client. A little annoying on that. But then, I played around a little bit with some of these tools. LivePlan is another one that has a lot of. They're more on the business planning side, and then you can do some of this, financial analysis on top of that. But then, yeah, there are some tools out there that I haven't even begun to explore. I did a little bit of a demo with Giraffe, I think shortly after they were founded. So that might have changed. It was probably about 2 years ago. So they might have changed by now. But things like Power BI, Tableau, any sort of data analytical sort of engine just seems way beyond not only the scope of what as you said, somebody more focused on the tax side of things. And with clients coming to me who, for the most part, are only interested in what kind of tax savings am I getting them, right? But also just it feels like it's just too powerful, right? Like it's something that I would never be able to scratch the surface of its full capabilities. And so to take the leap of investing both money to sign up for and subscribe for some of these things, and the time and energy to really learn, the true capabilities, and then even be able to figure out how to start getting data into these things, right? So talk to me like I'm a tax only shop, even though I'm not. I'm tax and CAS, but talk to me like I'm a tax only shop, and you're trying to sell me on CAS, but like I want to be able to do a little bit more than just monthly reporting. Like where would I start? What's the first step that you'd recommend to getting some of these pretty pictures to my clients?
It's a great question with a lot to unpack. When we're talking about scaling a CAS service, we have to remember that the end result is that we're being helpful to the client, right? That goes back to episode 1, just be helpful. So we're providing this financial information to a client, and that's going to be different for every client, right? Like that, it's going to be different for a manufacturing business, and it's going to be different for a service-based business. It's all going to be very, very different. So when we're talking about scaling, this is why it is so important to pick a niche or 2 or 3 or whatever, but certainly concentrate your efforts around a defined set of industry verticals, number 1. And then number 2, to standardize your tool set. So what are you going to use for payroll? What are you going to use for your GL? What are you going to use for, XYZ, bill pay, stuff like that? The reason why we need to standardize that is because that's going to standardize where the data comes from. And then that is going to help you to select one of these analytics or data visualization tools that you can then use. So I wouldn't start from, oh, I want to use tool XYZ, or I want to use, tool ABC. I would start with, what is my industry set? What is my tech stack that is going to feed that industry set? And then what analytic tool can I use that is going to integrate with my tech stack? Because then you don't have to go jump through hoops, which is one of the huge mistakes that I've made starting out my CAS practice, in order to take data out of these various disparate systems that don't necessarily import or sync into this analytics tool, put them into a data warehouse somewhere, and then connect the analytics tool to the data warehouse. That ETL process, extract, transform, load process that happens in the middle there, is super expensive. It is super complicated, and it's not probably a skill set that you have internally. And it's really hard to hire for, by the way. So that's where the importance of that comes from. Once you know what tools you're going to be able to use, and then you can pick out a data visualization tool, then you're kind of off to the races, right? And for a lot of clients, they haven't had access to this information from their accountant before, or they don't even know that it exists. Maybe they're a startup. They just don't even know that this financial information, this advisory level service exists. So you're really trying to move from 0 to 1. Don't try to move from 0 to 10 right off of Jump Street. And when you're building out that reporting package, it's really just having a conversation with a client. Like, what is helpful? What are the decisions that you need to make in your business? What is the information that you need in order to be able to make those decisions? And then you build out whatever that dashboard or that reporting package is going to look like.
Yeah. So you mentioned, we can cut all this out, right? So you mentioned a dashboard versus a report. What's actually showing up on this dashboard, right? Like what are you actually putting into it? How are you deciding what goes into it? And then obviously the data transfer thing, right? So like how are you deciding what data you're pulling? You mentioned financial and non-financial data, right? How financial data are easy. They're just there in the GL software, right? But the non-financial data, and then going from that to this dashboard of pretty pictures, like what does that process actually look like? How are you deciding what that end product for the client is going to look like?
Right. That goes all the way back to the discovery process with the client and asking them, what is your tech stack? What are the things that you're using? And then when they tell you that, you can extrapolate, well, this is the information that I have access to. And you need to really think about, well, does this tool have an API? If not, does this tool connect to at least like Zapier or Integromat? Do I even know how to use APIs? Do I know how to use Integromat or Zapier or whatever, which is now Make, by the way. That's Integromat. So how am I going to get at this data? Is it going to have to be some sort of a CSV export from this platform, which is going to be a pain, which is going to require time? So now you know what data you have access to, you know what your client is looking at or has the potential to look at, and you know how you have to get to it. Now you can have a conversation about, well, what is important to you in order to run your business? And the client may have a perfect idea of the information that they need to successfully run their business. They may not. That is the job of the advisor, which is you, in order to have that conversation and say, okay, well, have you thought about looking at X, Y, and Z? Or how about, A, B, and C? And then you can really nail down, like, this is the data that we need in order to create the metrics that we need to present to the client in order to have a meaningful conversation. And then you can have this kind of conversation around the tech stack. Like, look, you said that you wanted to be able to make a decision about this. However, we can't get to that data. Do we need to either migrate a tool or implement a new tool or whatever it is, or do we need to skip that metric altogether because for the benefit that we're going to get out of it, it's just not worth the expense? So that's the conversation that you need to have. From there, you can decide, well, these are the 6 or 7 most important things that need to go into this dashboard. And if it's going to be a dashboard, remember, it's a one-pager. It needs to be digestible. You need to be able to look at it in one fell swoop and figure out exactly what's going on with the business. And the business owner needs to have that capability too. So you've got to make it approachable and digestible. So once you've done that, then you're good. Then you're off to the races. You can start to have a conversation using this thing as a tool.
Is this something you're updating monthly with the close, or is this something that gets updated more frequently than that? Like, are we talking about weekly, daily, hourly? Like, what's the cycle of this dashboard, and how often are you planning for the owner to actually go in and be looking at this thing and saying, wait, these numbers don't look up to date. I need up to date numbers. What do you run into there in terms of the time frame of recalculating and resetting the dashboard to up to date figures?
Right, and that's a really good question. So that's one of those things where you really need to be clear around client expectations. For instance, are you going to close the books on, like, well, not close the books, but are you going to be updating the financials on a weekly basis or a daily basis? If not, then the client needs to know that. So that gets around your cadence as far as what your service level agreement is going to be. Excuse me, cut that out. Remind me what the question was around how often it's going to be updating. Mm-hmm. Okay, so depends on your service level agreement. It depends on how often you promise your client that you are going to be updating the financials. That's the first piece. Now, if you're using non-financial data, a great example is time tracking data, where theoretically you've got employees of the client organization who are entering time, possibly on a quarter hour, half hour basis, certainly on a daily basis if they're doing it well. That information is going to update, hopefully, your reporting package or your dashboard fairly frequently, at least multiple times per day. But that gets into what are the limitations of the tool that you're using? What are the limitations of the data pipes or connections that you're using? Like, I'll tell you, we internally use Google Data Studio. The back end for that is Google Sheets, because every accountant knows how to use a spreadsheet, which is why I moved to that product, is because everybody on the team can now update the dashboard or the financial reporting package. Well, the process that we have in place is going to pull financial information every 3 hours, but Google Sheets or Google Data Studio is going to update every 15 minutes. So every 15 minutes, that information is going to update. It's not going to be necessarily the financial information, but it could be the non-financial information. For instance, time data is going to update every 15 minutes. But it really all gets back to setting that expectation with the client. Like, this is what our tools can do. This is what our service level agreement is. This is how often we're going to be updating things, and this is what you can expect. Like, we've got clients who pop into their financial reporting package every single day. We've got clients who don't look at it at all, and we singularly use it as a tool during our financial review meetings to walk through, because they have trouble walking through it themselves and interpreting what the data says. And that's totally cool. You're going to have clients like that. But your job as an advisor is to walk them through and explain, this is what this means, and teach them, when you're looking at this by yourself, this is how you should interpret this. And if you have questions, reach out, because that gets back to the whole just be helpful thing.
So there's still some education on the client side that needs to happen here, right? It's not like you just put together this dashboard and then all of a sudden you don't ever have to talk to the client again because you just tell them to go look at the dashboard, right? Like, you're still walking them through the dashboard. You're still getting feedback on whether the dashboard itself is helpful. Maybe some parts of it they get, some parts they don't. Some parts they're looking at every day and it seems really helpful to them. Other things they're just ignoring because they don't really understand why it's there. And so the communication with the client, even though you've set up this dashboard full of pretty pictures so that they can understand just at a glance what's going on with their business, you still have to talk to the client. You still have to communicate with them regularly in order to help them understand their business and what's going on.
Absolutely. Don't just throw a dashboard or a reporting package at a client and say, here you go, we're done. That is not the way to do this. But a pro tip that you could potentially do, and Logan hit on this in our last episode, but once you put together the package or the dashboard or whatever it's going to be, go record a Loom video and just walk through, like, this is what this is how you interpret it, and then make sure that the client has that somewhere in an accessible space, and then they can access it. So if they want to go look at the dashboard, they can go look at a 2 or 3 minute Loom video. Don't make this a 20-minute Loom video, because nobody will ever watch it. It's not digestible. So make a 2 or 3 minute Loom video. This is how you walk through this. This is how you interpret it. Make sure that the client has it. And then, if worst comes to worst, they can always go watch the Loom video, then go back to the dashboard and kind of do this, self kind of reinforcing teaching moment sort of thing. and then be okay with it. But you can't just throw a reporting package at a client and say, we're done. This is what it is. Here's our advisory service. It just doesn't work that way without a conversation.
So back to the dashboard versus reports question. When is just a dashboard appropriate, and when do you need to include a report with that dashboard? When do you need to also send them the regular accounting reporting that we're used to sending? Is this a replacement of the monthly or quarterly manager's report or financial report, or do they need to work in tandem with each other?
I think it depends on your practice and it depends on your client set. Like I'll tell you that we do not provide traditional financial statements to clients. Instead, what we do is we have this reporting package, which is why we have a reporting package as opposed to a dashboard. The way that we use the reporting package, we've got one tab for an income statement, which basically breaks down the income statement in a graphical way and kind of highlights what is important to look at. We did the same for the balance sheet and the cash flow statement. So we've actually replaced those statements because we think, again, that looking at this in a graphical representation with things that are highlighted is a little bit more meaningful to a client than numbers on a page, basically. We can certainly do both, and our clients have access to QBO, and they can go in and run reports. They can ask us to run reports. We can do both for sure. But the primary driver of the conversations that we're having is that reporting package, and it's graphical.
See, that's really cool. I think it's one of these cases where it's a lot of work to think, to first of all, mental work to wrap your head around a process that is something other than what we're used to doing and trained to do as accountants, which is just send out financial statements, right? But we know that that's for 99% of our clients, it's just not helpful. So it's a mental leap, first of all, to admit that that's not the best way to help our clients, right? But then I think second of all, it's a leap of time and maybe some money and some energy, whether it's you alone, as a solo practitioner, or as the partner, or staff time, if you've got a staff, to invest into picking one or two of these technological applications and then learn how to use it and then start putting data into it and then playing around with the data and seeing what you can do with it. And then, right, you still haven't even shown any of this to the client, right? So like you still haven't really test driven any of this stuff until you put it in front of the client and seeing the client's reaction to it. So it's definitely something that I know need to be doing and I should be doing. I've got some clients in mind right now who it would probably actually make our relationship a lot easier because the client is one of those types, like you mentioned, where he's logging into QuickBooks every morning. He's reading the financial statements himself. He's not understanding the financial statements, but he's just looking at the top line and the bottom line. And if things don't quite add up the way he's done the mental math in his head, then I start getting emails and text messages from them, right? Saying, something's off with the financial statements. And, it gets to the point to where if I had a way of displaying this information to him where it was easy enough for him to understand that he could reconcile it with the mental math that's going on, but at the same time, maybe not so detailed, right? Like a P&L can be, or like a balance sheet for a high 6, low 7-figure business could be, to where he's not nitpicking individual numbers. He's just getting an idea. He's seeing that the financials match up with what he thinks is going on inside of his own head. And then, he can just feel confident about his business. Is that kind of the direction here? Is that how I should be thinking about trying to set something up for a client, is just getting them to the point to where ultimately at the end of the day they feel just a little bit more confident about running their business, and that the financials, that work that I'm doing, matches up with what he thinks is really going on in the trenches, day-to-day work of the business.
Yeah, I think that the last sentence right there really just hits the nail on the head. Does it help your client run their business a little bit more effectively, and does it line up with what you're doing financially? It's no more complicated than that. But you also hit on a really interesting point, is that an analytic tool or dashboard or whatever it is can almost serve as a little bit of a distraction for a client in a good way. And what I mean by that is if you have clients who are poking around in QuickBooks or poking around in Xero, and I know that you do, and they're going in and they're making changes just willy-nilly. This is one way to get them out of spending so much time in those platforms, which is ultimately going to save you a headache and it's going to save your staff time, which it's just one of those ancillary benefits of doing reporting in this way.
Fantastic. So we've been kind of high level here talking about different software, different benefits, some of the costs of going through this. Can you maybe walk us through, and obviously keep this anonymous or whatever, but walk us through maybe a practical example of, like you said, on a discovery call, you talked with a client, you figured out a couple things that they needed. Give us a little bit of some specifics, right? So let's say I'm building a client dashboard from scratch. I have no idea. This is the first one I've ever done. What's the logic? What's the strategy of building out this dashboard? What are the different components? I mean, you mentioned pretty pictures, right? So I'm imagining there's going to be a bar graph somewhere. There's going to be a pie chart somewhere, right? But what is the actual strategy here when I'm putting this together? What are some of the different options I have as far as components that I could put into this thing? And then what are you looking for in terms of the overall structure and look of this to help the client actually read this thing that's going to make it an improved experience for them over just, say, a P&L and a balance sheet?
Yeah, really good question. So the strategy here is to make it as digestible at a single glance as possible. The way to do that is with a really efficient use of real estate. And certainly if you're doing a dashboard where you've only got room for 6 or 7 KPIs and it's going to be on a single page, certainly you have to be a little bit more careful than if you do a report that's going to be over several pages. But you're trying to make it as digestible as possible. And that, when we're talking about real estate use, that gets into the type of chart that you're going to include, but then it also gets into colors. And colors are going to be mentally expensive. So when you've got a whole bunch of like really bright colors and stuff like that, it's distracting. It's just mentally expensive. So you're going to look for a little bit more neutral colors. Certainly throw your branding in there somehow, but don't make it like offensive or just overbearing. So use of colors and then the use of charts. Now when we're talking about charts, pie charts, everybody knows those. Donut charts, which is basically just a pie chart with a hole in the middle. They look kind of cool, but I don't know that they're necessarily better than a pie chart. Scorecards. So if you were just, or a KPI, as it's called in Power BI, if you're looking at just one number, if you're just providing one number, the client just needs to see one number. They don't need to see it trended over time or anything like that. Then that's when you would use a scorecard. Line charts, obviously, there's nothing really that's crazy that's out there that, accountants and CAS practitioners are going to be unfamiliar with. It's just a matter of how do you lay them out, and then what are you using to convey the information that your client really needs to see.
So you brought up a couple things there, and I think they are definitely fodder for future episodes. One of those is KPIs, key performance indicators. And, it's definitely something that I need to work on with my clients. I think for a lot of my clients, their number one KPI is just taxes, right? And for some of them, it's profit, but they don't really understand why profit is a KPI, right? Like I think there's the process of having the KPI, and then there's the process of understanding why that truly is a KPI for you. And I love that this is a way that you could bring all of those data together. And at one point, on one hand, you could really show the trends. You could show the change over time through, like you said, a line chart or a bar graph. But then at the same time, you can highlight some of those key numbers, right? So you can just have this scorecard that's showing you, no, this is the one number you really need to focus on. And maybe there are 2 or 3 or 4 of those, but it's not something that you need to focus on a trend on, but it's just today's value or this month's value. Here it is. So yeah, I love this approach to giving the client something to look at that is going to help them understand their business, help them understand their financial situation. That isn't just, look, here, read these reports that were written for technical professionals in the accounting industry, and you've never been trained to read one. But that's really all I can do for you, because that's what my software spits out for me.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want a really good, digestible, in-depth conversation of how to design dashboards and reports, there's a book out there. It's called Information Dashboard Design. It's by Stephen Few, F-E-W. And he's written a bunch of books. They're all very good. He's probably one of the leading experts out there as far as how to design these things in a way that's approachable and meaningful and digestible for clients, which is really what we're looking for. So I would definitely recommend going and checking out that book.
I am going to look that up and probably add that to my Kindle library here if it's available for Kindle. Otherwise, I'll figure out some other way of getting it. But I think that just about does us for time for this episode. Chris, where on the internet can people find you?
You can find me at betterwaycpa.com. That is our website. And you can also find me on Twitter at Chris Hervishon, ChrisHerver, V as in Victor, Ochon. And Jeremy, where can they find you and where can they find future episodes of the show?
Best place to find me is on Twitter at JWellsCFO. And you can also follow the show at CPA Advisory Show on Twitter and CPAadvisoryshow.com. And that will take you to our dashboard of all our episodes where you can find those. You can also subscribe to the show on all the major podcast networks, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can also watch video of our show on YouTube. So be sure to go to your podcast network of choice and subscribe there. And if you're so inclined, go to YouTube and subscribe to our channel there as well.
And if you leave us
Well,
a review, maybe we will read it on the air.
absolutely. So
Maybe.
definitely subscribe, like, and leave those reviews. And we'll definitely use that to think about future episode topics because we'll come up with one or two on our own, but we definitely need your help in coming up with more episode topics. And we want to be helpful and talk about things that you need help with. Chris, thank you so much. This episode I know has been incredibly helpful for me. I think it's going to be helpful for just about anybody tuning into it also.
Love that. Thanks, Jeremy. Great chatting with you as always.
Good deal. Thanks again. This has been the CPA Advisory Show with Chris Hervishon and Jeremy Wells. Thanks for listening and have a good one.